What happens if the most startling aspect of the bizarre history of rock and roll is revealed? Not only is this a tale of celebrity gone wrong, but it also altered the norm surrounding rumors, loyalty, and survival. For decades, fans have speculated and discussed what actually transpired behind those closed doors. After years of silence, the well-known child bride of Jerry Lee Lewis finally speaks up, revealing information that even her most critical detractors found shocking. You think you know what happened? Not so quick. Everything changed because of a single secret that was kept for years. What lie turned their entire world upside down, and what finally got her to say something? Come along. You will soon discover. Nobody was safe that day. Myra Gale Brown first encountered Jerry Lee Lewis as a family friend rather than as a well-known rock and roll singer. Myra was only 5 years old at the time. Her cousin Jerry Lee moved in with them in Memphis, Tennessee. Her father, J. Lewis, accepted W. Brown's invitation to live with them while pursuing his ambition of becoming a famous musician. Nobody could have predicted at the time that this transaction would result in one of the most startling partnerships in rock history. As Myra grew older, Jerry Lee, once a distant cousin, became interested in spending more time with her. He would arrive at her school and invite her to go get ice cream or offer to drive her home. What had started out as a joke became increasingly tense. Myra recalled later that Jerry Lee loved her more than she believed was safe. The distinction between fun and something far more serious was blurred when he began kissing her unexpectedly when he saw her. Did Jerry Lee see Myra as a means of maintaining order in his chaotic life, or was his interest in her merely an act of mistaken love? People are still troubled by that question, which fuels the argument that would determine their relationship. As Myra attempted to understand the cousin she had known all her life and the man who seemed determined to introduce her to the adult world, her confusion grew. To make a very significant occasion into a pointless recollection, give Myra a wedding license application bearing her fictitious name. She told him not to do it because her father would be furious, and she was shocked. Jerry Lee, however, was adamant that they could defend their families in any situation. He made a concerted effort to persuade her to accompany him to the courthouse the following day. A priest there performed their marriage, but neither of them truly understood what he was saying. Those hastily stolen wedding plans were the beginning of things that might occur that would alter their lives. What emotions do you believe Jerry Lee was experiencing at the time? Hopelessness, rage, or love? Myra's mental haze has never completely cleared. However, it was a significant choice because that day essentially signaled the end of her childhood and laid the groundwork for the storm that would eventually hit them. What followed turned a private vow into a massive commotion, shocking people all over the world. A secret unable to remain secret. Jerry Lee Lewis's business was booming in 1958, so it didn't seem like a huge deal when he brought Myra along on his European tour. However, this decision would soon prove to be the final straw that put an end to his global ascent to fame. As soon as Lewis arrived at London's Heathrow Airport, the media flocked to cover the rock and roll artist who would take Elvis Presley's place. On that day, 13-year-old Myra stood silently in the background. She went unnoticed at first. However, one persistent reporter casually questioned her about her identity and the reason behind her participation in the tour. Given her youth and potential naivete, Myra provided an honest response. She was married to Jerry Lee Lewis. Despite the statement's simplicity, it had unanticipated consequences for both of them. The news sparked a media frenzy that made headlines not only in Britain but also around the world. In order to cover the shocking wedding of the 22-year-old star to his teenage cousin, newspapers set aside important political stories. People were curious not only about her age but also about Jerry Lee's unresolved marriage to another woman and their familial ties. The press viewed the connection as a disgraceful moral lapse. Was Myra's age the only thing that infuriated British people, or were they also using the occasion to attack rock music? People were even more suspicious at the time because rock and roll was already being viewed as a sign of moral decay and revolt. Jerry Lee's incident seemed to give critics exactly what they wanted. It immediately and horribly affected Jerry Lee's success. His performances were met with laughter and calls for his arrest. Venue owners and performers hurried to put an end to his The tour that was meant to further his fame was cancelled within days. The couple's visas were revoked, forcing them to depart the nation in embarrassment. Myra had been given a name that would be with her forever, and people could no longer avoid seeing her. Had Myra changed the topic of the first question, might this negative outcome have been prevented? Or did Jerry Lee's fame ultimately fade because of the secrets he brought across the Atlantic? That London moment changed rock history forever and set them up for success. The scandal that dashed hope. The backlash was swift and severe when it was revealed that Jerry Lee Lewis was married to 13-year-old Myra Gale Brown. In what seemed like a split second, Jerry Lee went from being a rock star to being ostracized by his peers. He was earning up to $10,000 every night by performing for enthusiastic, full-house audiences. Bookings, however, virtually stopped as soon as the word spread. Fans who used to constantly applaud him abandoned him, radio stations stopped playing his records, and numerous concerts across the nation were cancelled. The man who was meant to succeed Elvis Presley as the king of rock and roll now had to put in a lot of effort to salvage what remained of his career. As more information became available, public indignation increased. Myra was not only underage, but she was also Jerry Lee's first cousin once removed, and at the time of their marriage, he hadn't even finalized his divorce from his first wife. The media took notice of this. In the news, he was referred to as a baby snatcher and other derogatory terms, portraying him as a moral failure during a period when rock music was being accused of corrupting children. Was the outrage directed at Jerry Lee a result of his marriage, or was it a component of a broader anti-rock and roll movement? Both were indicated by the time. The scandal provided the ideal opportunity for those who disliked the style to disparage the bold music that most people were afraid of. The news media continued to discuss it. Every action taken by Myra and Jerry Lee seemed to exacerbate the situation. Relationships, pregnancy, and being accused of crimes that never occurred were all discussed. Did these rumors come to pass, or were they fabricated to boost newspaper sales and deflate a rising star? The distinction between them became less obvious as the incident progressed. Jerry Lee's rock music career in the United States was undoubtedly destroyed for years to come. His ambition to become the greatest rock musician was dashed when he eventually switched to a country sound, which aided him. Originally intended to be private, the marriage ended up being a public spectacle. In addition to ending Jerry Lee's career, the controversy permanently altered how critics and fans viewed him and his work. In the midst of the storm, getting close. Despite the opposition of others, Jerry Lee Lewis and Myra made the decision to remain together. In a world that had suddenly turned hostile, Myra, who was just beginning to enter adolescence, believed that loyalty was the only way to stay safe. She later discussed how, despite not fully understanding what was happening around them, she was resolved to support her husband. The more people shouted at them, the more tightly they appeared to hold on. Myra believed that if they could work through the scandal together, they could handle anything. They had no one else to turn to, so was their devotion motivated by desperation or genuine love? In addition to the possibility of losing their jobs and reputations, Jerry Lee and Myra were in actual danger. Even routine travel became dangerous due to reports of fights, hate mail, and death threats. The couple's neighbors, co-workers, and occasionally even relatives stopped communicating with them. The financial impact was disastrous. After shows were cancelled and record sales plummeted, Jerry Lee's once promising future soon became less so. As Myra attempted to make sense of a life suddenly filled with uncertainty and fear, she was in many ways still a child. They both seemed to feel as though they were being attacked. Did this strengthen their bond, or did it cover up rifts that would eventually widen? They put on a united front for the people despite being heavily pressured and criticized. They demonstrated that their marriage was founded on love rather than just scandal to prove their enemies wrong. Myra became Jerry Lee's most tenacious protector, declaring she was neither a victim nor a pawn. The fact that they survived was a sign of redemption for their marriage and for both of them, and their defiant appearance became their identity. However, did inquiries actually enter their secure environment? Did Myra ever question whether supporting Jerry Lee was the right thing to do or if she was merely acting to survive? However, these early years would be characterized by the hope that they would survive the storm. Loyalty and love wouldn't shield the couple from the harm they had already experienced. Issues created a connection that would be tested by future calamities. They had each other and were alone against the world for the time being. When unfavorable events occurred at home. The birth of Steve Allen Lewis in 1959 marked a brief period of joy during a difficult time in Jerry Lee and Myra's lives. Even though she was still a girl, Myra was proud to have a child. With the arrival of their son, she hoped that things would return to normal. For a brief period, the couple appeared to find solace in family life after their careers failed and they were ridiculed by the public. However, the concern about their circumstances persisted behind the scenes. Despite their love for their child, their home was tense due to Jerry Lee's work issues and the ongoing scrutiny of their marriage. Some questioned whether the hope derived from family life could truly mend deeper wounds. The unthinkable horror of 1962 shattered that fragile peace. While Myra was visiting her mother, their 3-year-old son became lost outside and drowned in the family pool. Myra reportedly fell over her son's grave because she was so devastated by the loss and couldn't comprehend how such sorrow could have found her. Anger, bewilderment, and retreating were manifestations of Jerry Lee's sadness. Sadness exacerbated the already tense relationship between the couple. They were neither entirely prepared to handle it. Could any marriage, especially one that was already strained and full of issues, have survived such a loss? For them, the answer grew increasingly hazy. Following this period, Myra and Jerry Lee's marriage evolved, and their later years took on a new form. It soon shifted from being a day of resistance against the world to simply getting through each day. When their daughter Phoebe was born in 1963, Myra found solace during a period when she was very depressed and difficult to reach for support. However, nothing could erase the picture of Steve Allen with a newborn's joy. Conversely, Jerry Lee appeared even more disoriented as he grew increasingly erratic to get away from the suffering. It's also possible that their son's passing widened their mental distance from one another. Their marriage quietly changed as a result of the tragedy. What began as an intense and defiant match swiftly evolved into a struggle for survival in that connection. Even though they were both sad, it didn't seem to unite them. Rather, it appeared to create a silent environment where communication became increasingly difficult. The storm that occurred in their home following this loss would be even worse, despite the fact that the previous storms were severe and caused a lot of trouble. The domestic breakup was only the beginning. Even their closest friends would be shocked by what transpired behind closed doors. Behind closed doors, the marriage. Behind the scenes, Myra and Jerry Lee Lewis' marriage gradually devolved into one of loneliness, fear, and instability. As a teenager with perseverance and hope, Myra joined the union. She later revealed to others that Jerry Lee had a very short fuse. Jerry Lee is accused of acting violently as his business collapsed and his personal issues worsened. Fighting became frightening episodes, and Myra had to be careful not to irritate him. She has described how his mood swings caused her constant anxiety because she was never sure what would enrage him next. Was it grief, guilt, or something deeper that neither of them fully understood that was making him angry more and more? To make matters worse, Jerry Lee had a habit of cheating on his wife. His affairs, some of which were organized in secret while he was on tour and others that he carried out in public near home, would be revealed to Myra. The woman who had sacrificed so much to be with him felt a great deal of pain. Nevertheless, she remained and did her best to maintain their daughter Phoebe's tranquility. Some questioned whether Jerry Lee's infidelity was a desperate attempt to regain control of his collapsing world or if it was simply reckless behavior from a man who believed that results were no longer important. Amidst all of this, Myra was battling in private, attempting to hide the fact that her family's situation had deteriorated. Alcohol and drug use only made matters worse. Later in life, Myra described how Jerry Lee became unstable and angry due to his drinking. What ought to have been peaceful evenings became battlefields, and Myra fled to cope on her own. What was Jerry Lee aware of the damage he was doing? Or did he miss it because he was too preoccupied with his own mess? Despite being told to leave by family and friends, Myra stayed for many years because she believed that loyalty and love could heal the deepening wounds. Her resilience came at a high cost. She no longer felt safe, and she found it difficult to identify herself in the midst of the chaos. Being the woman behind the story had never been more expensive in private life than it was in public. The contests that connected Myra to the legend had once shaped her life, but now it was all about surviving. She would finally admit that her love for Jerry Lee had turned to fear as she navigated life's storms with a man who had changed so much. There was no turning back once the rifts in their marriage had widened. The affair that put a stop to it all. The marriage between Myra and Jerry Lee Lewis was irreparably ruined by the late 1960s. Jerry Lee's affairs were no longer concealed or disregarded after what began as isolated betrayals became a painful pattern. Myra used to stand by Jerry Lee through years of public shame, scandal, and tragedy. She knew she had to stop being faithful after the latest betrayal, which was said to involve a woman close to them. People she knew told her for a long time to leave for her own safety, but Myra had to get to that point on her own. The mental toll of years of lying and worsening verbal and physical abuse put Myra in a tough spot. Was Jerry Lee's careless behavior caused by a desire to hurt himself, or had he just stopped thinking about what would happen? Myra used to stand by Jerry Lee through years of public shame, scandal, and tragedy, but now she was facing the final blow, an affair that, in her own words, made it impossible to stay. In interviews afterward, she said she left him not because she no longer loved him, but because she needed to protect herself. Could love have made someone stay in a dangerous position where their life and dignity were in danger? The divorce order that ended the marriage in 1970 marked the end of a relationship that had once been talked about in both good and bad ways. In her divorce suit, Myra said that her husband had cheated on her and abused her. The court papers painted a bleak picture of what went on behind closed doors. For his part, Jerry Lee seemed to think that the breakup was inevitable, but he rarely talked about how it made him feel. There were rumors going around that he felt bad about sending Myra away or that his pride was just too strong for him to admit it. One thing that is clear is that they broke up closed a chapter in their lives that neither of them could have seen coming. That being said, the man Myra had bravely protected turned out to be the reason she left that marriage. There was one more act of betrayal in the affair that ended it all. It was the last nail in the coffin of a once-loved marriage. Myra didn't see leaving the marriage as a deal. She saw it as a way to protect herself. That last break was also when Myra decided to take back control of her life, leaving Jerry Lee's cloud behind for the first time in years. She was done with the cycle of sadness and shame and focused on making a life where her worth wasn't tied to someone else's chaos. For decades, rumors about their marriage would follow Myra. When she left, it was a quiet act of resistance, proof that you can choose a different path even after years of going through the unthinkable. Did Jerry Lee ever fully understand what he had lost, or was Myra's leaving just another step in his plan to destroy himself? The truth is still as hard to understand as their story. From being a child bride to a survivor, Myra Gale Brown had to start over with her life after she ended her marriage to Jerry Lee Lewis. Myra turned 32 on her birthday, which meant she was no longer a teenager growing up in the midst of a rock and roll scandal. Instead, she was now a woman determined to make things right. It wasn't easy to make the change. Myra went back to school to learn more and feel normal again after being away for a long time. She was a single mother and didn't have many means. She was also under a lot of public scrutiny, which made it hard for her to find a good life for her daughter Phoebe. If people heard the words, child bride, would Myra ever be free of them? Or would that chapter always be what people knew her to be? After getting divorced, Myra planned to get married to 2 more people. The first marriage was hard for her, but the second one, even though it didn't last long, taught her about her own wants and limits. It wasn't until Myra's third marriage that she finally felt safe and had a partner. In public, she has talked about how this union was different from the others because it was based on mutual respect and shared values instead of fear and survival. Had she always hoped that her third marriage would save her, or was it just a fresh start after years of being strong and growing? Myra has dedicated her professional life to forging a new path that is very different from the crazy early life she witnessed. Before she became an author, she worked as a real estate agent and wrote her own account of the events of those infamous years. In this way, Myra regained her voice from the media, which had been telling Jerry Lee's story with her as little more than an aside. Myra's writings and interviews provide more nuanced pictures of a woman who persevered, changed, and eventually thrived despite incredible circumstances. Those who had previously only seen her in tabloids were astounded by how deeply she thought and how well she recovered. The story of her journey from child bride to survivor does demonstrate her strength. The way she lived her life demonstrated that youth scandals don't have to determine a person's future. In her later years, Myra also found meaning in using her past to quietly help others who were facing shame in public or trouble in their private lives. She never wanted to be in the spotlight again, but she did support causes that encouraged people to be strong, grow as people, and realize how important it is to write their own stories. She became a symbol of how someone can move past the label that once threatened to define them through speaking events, community service, and personal connections. This wasn't her intention. Did she see herself as an example of a strong woman, or was she just set on living a quiet life? No matter what, Myra's story continues to inspire people who think that the worst parts of the beginning don't have to determine the end. Not feeling bad about looking back. In the years that followed, Myra Gale Brown talked about her marriage to Jerry Lee Lewis in a way that was both clear and kind. Many people would think that a woman who has been through so much shame, loneliness, betrayal, and fear would be angry. Instead, Myra talked about her past in a way that was surprisingly good. Some things were wrong with their marriage, but she didn't make Jerry Lee the victim or the bad guy. She said that they loved each other deeply, but their relationship was tainted by ignorance and bad decisions. Did they really believe that love could get them over all the problems that stood in their way? In her story, Myra says that she and Jerry Lee had fallen in love, but they didn't fully understand what would happen yet. Myra's anger waned over time, but she had a clearer picture of what went wrong. Myra could see that the decisions they made at such a young age and in the unusual circumstances of fame made their problems even worse. Myra has said that the intensity of their shared rebellion against the world was what brought them together at first but eventually drove them apart. She said many times in interviews that Jerry Lee wasn't a monster, even though he did many bad things. Instead, he was a man who was dealing with fame, loss, and his own inner demons. Did the pressures he was under mean that he would fail? Or did he have chances to go a different way? Myra never considered getting even or getting revenge, and she would never be able to see Jerry Lee in black and white terms because, from her perspective, they were just two flawed people trapped in the worst possible situations, each trying desperately but unsuccessfully to escape without causing too much harm. For this reason, she thanked her school system for teaching her such hard lessons that would make her stronger in her ability to survive. Myra doesn't feel bad about the past, and she can look back on it without feeling bad because she has accepted that it cannot be changed. Could she have chosen a different course in life? Maybe. In the end, Myra's thoughts leave her as a woman who has not found peace by letting go of the past, but by incorporating it into her present. That tabloid story turned into her story, which is now a complicated one about love, death, and getting through life. By sharing that story, she gave her fans an honest look at what it takes to be famous and rebellious as a teen. When you think you've heard everything, Myra's story leaves a mark that you can't get rid of. The name that will always live on. Even though it happened decades ago, many people still think of Myra Gale Brown as Jerry Lee Lewis's child bride. It's a name she has never been able to fully get rid of. The marriage still haunts her, even though she rebuilt her life, tried new things, and found love that will last. Talk shows and interviews always seem to come back to the story that everyone can't forget, the young girl who married her famous cousin. Myra has said many times that this name affected how people saw her and both limited and defined who she was. Would people ever be able to move past that one aspect of her life, or would that moment in rock and roll history always be associated with her? Myra chose to take control of her story over time, and through books, public speaking, and candid interviews, she told her story of events, dispelling myths and exposing false claims. Her memoir revealed in great detail what happened to her, showing both friends and critics what's really going on behind the news. Myra didn't just talk about old issues on her show, she also used it to promote honesty, strength, and the importance of learning from the past. Her voice, once drowned out by tabloid drama, became a powerful way to tell her story again. Did she succeed in altering the way history remembers her, or do people still believe the old stories? Now, Myra is speaking calmly and purposefully as she tells us about her trip, and she doesn't try to hide the painful years she endured as a child. Rather, she knows that they made her strong. She is proud of how she dealt with the storm that seemed like it would swallow up her whole life at one point. Her fans have been listening to her for a long time as she talks about her marriage, secrets, and how these things have been tearing her down. What she has said has left them speechless, not because it is shocking, but because it is honest and with honor. Back then, when she was in the news and getting laughed at, who would have thought she would come out looking like that? The last part of Myra's story wasn't about the marriage that made the world shake, but about the woman who lived through it and got through it. She shows that it is possible to take back and rebuild your identity, even if history tries to lock you into one shocking event. Myra talks about staying alive, being brave, and how important it is to listen to your own truth to those who can hear it. If you can't say anything about this story, please tell us in the comments what you think. To make sure you don't miss our next deep dive, don't forget to like, follow, and tap the bell. Before you go, watch the next video on your screen. Don't pass it up.